Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side.
Day we hustle, but the night we
Know that they ride or die. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side. Know that they ride or die. I keep boys by my side.
day we hustle, but the night
Boys by my side. Know that they ride or die. My name came up a lot, it sounds more when I was not around.
Ninja stems from Chinese, but its pronunciation changed after it was adopted into Japanese. Ninja translates to one who endures. Shinobi, on the other hand, is a homegrown Japanese term. Definition: ninja, noun, non-derogatory. That warrior who is dedicated to a life of strife, turmoil, and/or conflict, willing or unwilling, whether in self-defense or he is taken to hostility. See ninjas in the hood. Ninjas under constant attack by the state. A ninja is in his feelings. The modern ninja in the art of war. If that street ninja should be our boots on the ground, aiming his righteous anger and frustrations at the head of the dragon, that great serpent which conspires and coils about the ghetto, then the educated ninja should be akin to military intelligence, those that throw pencils better than hands, giving considerable direction to all ninjas at large, even those on the street. For this case study, we're going to do a flyover over the land of ancient China, eyeing the ground over which General Sun Tzu lays battle plans, using our exceptional foresight and hindsight to spy into his thoughts and intentions at a glance. We won't land on every verse or even every chapter, but we'll touch on enough points to draw the relevance of the work to our current situation and our mindset. This will be a takeoff point from which we can hone our critical thinking skills, exploring new heights of realization. Let's get it. From W.E.B. Du Bois' talented 10th and the field Negro, to the have-nots and the exceptional ninjas of today, I want to reveal the war strategies of old as actually being new, and even beyond that, as futuristic. History has the work, The Art of War, to a single author, referred to as Sun Tzu, or Master Sun, who must have compiled the work around 300 BC. Beyond the skimming of the paper skin we're about to do, pages of that life, I suggest you read it if you haven't, since you might be wondering, what does the strategy of someone that lived 300 years before Christ have to do with ninjas of today? Well, let's peel back the pages of time, because we can do that here in our imaginations. Chapter 1. Laying plans. Sun Tzu said, "The art of war is of vital importance to the state. The whole point of a military should be to secure peace and all moral prosperity for the overwhelming citizenry. War ought to be the violence of self-defense. The principle applies to countries, nations, communities, and families. It is why we must fight. Defend the homes on our block, our streets in the neighborhood, or even our communities from society at large. Chapter 2, Waging War. When you engage in actual fighting, if victory is long in coming, then men's weapons will grow dull and their ardor will be dampened. If you lay siege to a town, you will exhaust your strength. Again, if the campaign is protracted, the resources of the state will not be equal to the strain. This principle applies to why the hostile state rather conquer through manipulation, the conquering of the mind and behavior, and not through direct force. Direct force will tend to exhaust strength and resources of the aggressor. The strength and resources in this day and age could be seen as, well, moral capital, for example, the stock and faith that the whole world has invested in white supremacy. That faithful illusion is diminished when outright acts of violence are used, revealing the realities of wicked rulership. You know, this principle applies today when you talk about the hostile state versus ninjas. The conquering of the mind, they rather conquer the mind and the way of thinking and behavior, if that's possible, and not through direct force. Because direct force, using force and violence outrightly in public, it's a drain on the strength and the resources. And what I mean is, I don't mean that there are not enough police officers or white supremacist groups, but not strength in that sense, but the strength and resources of this day would be seen as, or could be seen as, moral capital, for example. There's a stock and a faith that the world has invested in white supremacy. And that illusion of faith that they put in white supremacy, it's spent, it's diminished when they see the outright acts of violence that are perpetrated on ninjas. And that, in turn, it reveals the realities of the wicked rulership, and it confirms what ninjas have been saying for the longest. Hence, a wise general makes a point of foraging on the enemy. 1 cartload of the enemy's provisions is equivalent to 20 of one's own, and likewise a single pickful of the provender is equivalent to 20 from one's own store. Many of the weapons and resources that's used against the modern ninja, they're weapons and resources that have been forged from the ninja's own culture. What the ninjas produce is typically co-opted, monetized, and sold back to them in turn as a finagled, weaponized version of the ninja's own making. A vehicle to push hostile agendas on him, things that are damaging and hostile to his own image and well-being. Rap music, a ninja invention that was sharpened in the turmoils of battle, designed to be the voice of the revolutionary, has been co-opted, monetized, and now is aimed at the ninja and his communities, telling him how much of a violent, hypersexualized beast he must be, and the woman how much of a violent, masculinized, hypersexualized bitch she has to be. This is one example. Now, in order to kill the enemy, our men must be roused to anger, that there may be advantage from defeating the enemy. They must have their rewards. People really need to be motivated to kill, to get there at some point in their psyche and their life. This is why there's an overwhelming anti-ninja propaganda and media assembly among the masses of ninjas and non-ninja people. The enemy pushes this campaign and hypes it up emotionally through repeated and relentless media onslaughts. And the rewards for killing a ninja are both monetary and social. Chapter 3, Attack by Stratagem. Sun Tzu said, in The Practical Art of War, The best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. So, too, it is better to recapture an army entire than to destroy it. To capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire, rather than to destroy them. You know, as a student of history, I used to wonder why ninjas were never totally destroyed by the dominant society in the United States. It was obvious why the human property was not destroyed during slavery, for example. But it wasn't so obvious to me when the country was contending with what it called the Negro problem. Why not kill them all, South and and North? Why reach makeshift truces, keeping Negroes in their place, subjecting them to a prolonged, long drawn-out death of the mind and the body, rather than just getting rid of the identifiable problem dressed in black, once and for all? Well, like keeping the spoils of war, the lands, shelters, and heifers, the goal is to continue. The goal is to continue to reap from the Negro's production, to seize the thing of value rather than destroy it, to inhabit the house rather than burning it to the ground once and for all. Ninjas produce the overwhelming majority of capital in all areas of the American experience. They are the salt of the earth and food that is consumed by the nation and also exported globally. It makes sense why the ninja was never totally destroyed once and for all. Verse 17. On principles of victory. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. You know, when you're talking about the unifying banner of white supremacy, one can see the same pride and patriotism in the toothless and poor races. The one you drive by on the corner on the way to work. You can see that same gleam of pride and patriotism as you see in a Bill Gates Sr., allegedly.
Issue that really grabbed me as urgent were issues related to population, reproductive health.
But did you come to reproductive issues as an intellectual?
When I was growing up, my parents were always involved in various volunteer things. My dad was head of Planned Parenthood, and it was very controversial to be involved with that.
Father and financier of the infamous eugenics movement. This phenomena of the dirty poor identifying with the filthy rich via sheer ideology is an admirable military feat. It's a situation where a homeless white person can perceive himself as having more in common with the highest ranking military official, the President of the United States, for example. More in common with that person than he has in common with the equally homeless black dude across the street on the other corner. This is obviously a principle and commonality of patriotism and the ideology of white supremacy experience, more than shared benefits in the real world. You see, the president has a real stake in racial division in the status quo. That dirty soldier does not, but can be effectively led to think that he does. You know, it makes me think of Bacon's Rebellion. This was the quintessential experiment when the masses of the have-nots rebelled across racial lines. You had people from different identifiable groups, blacks, whites, percentages of others, quote-unquote, natives, the poor and the working class that bound together and was rebelling against the aristocracy, what was essentially a reproduction of the aristocracy in this yet to be United States. And what wound up happening is damn near overthrew the experiment. And what the rich aristocracy people did was they had to cut a deal. You know, they had to come out of those pockets, had to cut a deal. They had to respect the sheer number and the strength of the masses. But what happened after that was that they learned through that experiment and perhaps a couple of others, that the people united together across racial lines, people that bonded according to their real interests in the world, were more dangerous. So they wound up instituting systems where they gave white citizens preferential treatment and rewards over black and other counterparts, over blacks in particular. So they established an imagined hierarchy amongst the people that was not so much real outside of the artificial rewards they were prepared to give, but it made people think and see each other differently amongst the masses of people. So all of a sudden you had the white ninjas versus the black ninjas versus the red ninjas. Every ninja, you know, some of them striving to wear white, no longer seeing themselves all in the same clan. And the stark reality of racism, you know, as expressed today, anti-black racism took hold. It was one of the bastions of anti-black racism. Verse 18, hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I don't think ninjas know themselves. You know? Moreover, it seems the ninja doesn't or hasn't learned the enemy either. Not even through demonstrable historical behavioral patterns. We can look back in time and see that there's a lot to be learned from his story. But the ninja doesn't know, doesn't read it. This leads to the ninja getting caught off guard, slashed with a sword, unexpectedly stabbed in the back, hit by nunchuck and swept off his feet, his eyes bulging even bigger with surprise every single time. Chapter 4, Tactical Dispositions. To secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands, but the opportunity of defeating the enemy is provided by the enemy himself. Ninjas need to fortify their own selves first and foremost. This is something in line with cleaning house, where they logically take note of who is for them and who is against their cause for justice. This the ninja does by proving the works of each man, considering his stance logically and objectively as one does a mannequin without a smiling face. Verse 11. What the ancients called a clever fighter is one who not only wins, but excels in winning with ease. Hence, his victories bring him neither reputation for wisdom nor credit for courage. The problem with many fighting ninja warriors is that they have to end up in the spotlight. You know, the problem with a fighting ninja warrior who has to end up in the spotlight, has to get all the credit, is that he will be weakened by bribes and by flattery. He'll be tempted to sell out his position once the mainstream begins to tell him Oh, how great he is, how clever he is, how he is above and beyond, not like the other ninjas. A ninja should do what a ninja does for the sake of it, because his heart is in the right thing to do, getting his rewards along this way in the sincere respect and love of the people. This kind of love of the people and the respect is something that is not just in the real world where you're doing the work. I think it goes beyond the heart, crossing even into the reasoning. It's something that transcends this life on this mortal coil. At least it feels that way to me. Verse 16. The consummate leader cultivates the moral law and strictly adheres to method and discipline. Thus, it is in his power to control success. One important reason why we respect moral laws is not because the laws force us to act a certain way, but because the laws are proven and time-tested to benefit our peace and our prosperity and our community, even in times of war. The young banger who don't respect the rules, the young G that says, yo, I do what the fuck I want to do around here, ninja. This kind of dude breaks the moral code of the streets. Now, a lightning bolt might not strike him like a bullet in that moment, putting a period to the end of his sentence, but a storm inevitably forms over his sky from his horizon, eclipsing his entire life and that of his own family. A posted speed limit on the street, for example, is not going to slow your car. You look at it, it says something, but it doesn't slow your car, not by the laws of physics. But then the number of flips you're going to do if you lose control and as an immediate result of that same speed will make sense then, if the unexpected ever happens. So moral laws are like that. They ought to be obeyed not because you see an immediate problem with it, an immediate karma. That's not the motivation. You do right because overall, the price to be paid will be a direct result from the behavior. Chapter 5. Energy. In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. Verse 6. Indirect tactics, efficiently applied, are inexhaustible as heaven and earth, unending as the flow of rivers and streams, like the sun and moon. They end, but to begin anew. Like the four seasons, they pass away to return once more. I think this is an example of ultimate victory. It's not when the last bloody body is fallen by a sword or a bullet, but when the last standing bodies have been convinced of their loss and inferiority. You see, once a ninja has come to accept his own inferior status, he tends to mentally perpetuate the forces of the oppressor inside his own mind first, and then to his surroundings. This, of course, with the perpetual encouragement of propaganda, those indirect tactics of warfare that are unending. Chapter 6. Weak points and strong. If the enemy is taking his ease, he can harass him. If well supplied with food, he can starve him out. If quietly encamped, he can force him to move. When ninjas think that white people always come around to harass when a ninja is at peace, seeming to be leery or upset at any particular stance a ninja might take, if too many ninjas are standing there talking with each other, having a good time, and the white supremacist seems to have to come and disrupt that, not knowing what the ninja's up to, but being suspicious anyway. It's a practical art of war. He's throwing the ninja constantly off balance at times, whether at the job, in the classroom, social circles, out at the bar, or even in the streets. Verse 11. If we wish to fight, the enemy can be forced to an engagement, even though he be sheltered behind a high rampart and a deep ditch. All we need do is attack some other place that he will be obliged to relieve. Racism, white supremacy will often target the elderly, the children, the women. And this is not only a sign of ruthlessness, but the method to the madness is also a psychological sort of warfare. You can subdue the entirety of the resistance of the ninja community. This is an obvious ploy to leverage psychological terrorism and emotional response, which weakens your logic. Verse 14. We can form a single united body, while the enemy must split up into fractions. Hence, there will be a whole pitted against separate parts of a whole, which means that we shall be many to the enemy's few. The workings of divide and conquer, they're not just on an obvious large level, but they're intricate. They're in the workplace. Actually, divide and conquer is part of the warfare that's waged against the individual, having them divided in their own mind, and hence not a whole, not strong as a whole with a single mindset. And then that extends to family, across gender, across community. Pause. 3, 2, 1. Verse 32. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. Ninjas often get stuck on non-permanent ways of thinking, of ways of looking at things and acting. Ninjas think of things often in terms of an all or nothing mentality, of permanency, when in reality, ninjas should be more flexible, not holding on to principles or tactics of the struggle out of nostalgia or some imagined respect for the old times or the elders or the good old days. The drive for a ninja to vote, for example, might have been a tactical breakthrough for its time, a bold thing to do, But when the only option is the right or the left hand of the same enemy, a ninja should not take either in agreement. It may be time to rethink old strategies. Verse 34. The 5 elements, water, fire, wood, metal, earth, are not always equally predominant. The 4 seasons make way for each other in turn. There are short days and long. The moon has its periods of waning and waxing. The nature of the environment, the circumstances, and even the general quote-unquote spirit of the age. For example, the age of the Black Panther Party, the age of the ADOS, American descendants of slaves. Those ages may change, those seasons may change, and each has a different climate. So these should be considered as perhaps deviated times and methods, but altogether they're pathways that lead to Rome in the legacy struggle for justice. Where all roads lead rather to Timbuktu for a ninja. You know, the different method of struggle for the age is not the destination in and of itself. It's not to say a ninja's a Black Panther now, and that's the point. I'm proud with the leather coat. Not a Black Panther simply to be, but to be a force for good of its day, conducive to freedom and justice for ninjas, all others worldwide in this day and beyond. Neither is the ADOS movement to be heralded and uplifted as a standalone thing, accomplishment in and of its day, but it's an extension of the long chain of movements that have linked successively through time and generations to form a way through which the legacy movement of its day will live to fight tomorrow. Chapter 7, Maneuvering. Doing 100 li in order to wrest an advantage. The leaders of all your 3 divisions will fall into the hands of the enemy. Verse 8. The stronger men will be in front, the jaded ones will fall behind. And on this plan, only 1/10 of your army will reach its destination. Ninjas should not unduly praise those that quote unquote make it, the ones up front, the strong ones up front, and overlook the common folk or others who may not have made it in the same way. You see, in the stresses of war, only few can make it up front. But those up front still need the rest for backup and support. The common ninja, for example, or the street soldier, is a noble and valuable calling in this way. As long as his efforts are good and valiant, ninjas shouldn't on the regular guy. Verse 20. When you plunder a countryside, let the spoil be divided amongst your men. When you capture a new territory, cut it up into allotments for the benefit of the soldiery. The spoils of warfare and struggle, let's say fame, money, and praise, should not be focused on single individuals any more than the responsibility for speaking for the entire community of ninjas. Single individuals from any rank or position can be compromised. Street, academia, or middle roads. This is part and parcel of the lure of stardom and the problem with becoming that special ninja. So credit, respect, and noteworthiness must be equally shared amongst the ranks. Verse 27. A whole army may be robbed of its spirit. A commander-in-chief may be robbed of his presence of mind. Verse 28. Now a soldier's spirit is keenest in the morning. By noonday it has begun to flag, and by evening his mind is bent only in returning to camp. The instance of the older generation, like the baby boomers, for example, tapping out of the struggle because they're tired, it's understandable from a logic standpoint. It's time for someone else to step up and take the helm. You know, older generations whose more passive tactics may have seemed revolutionary for the times and situations that they once faced. Those tactics and ways of thinking may be likely outmoded for today's challenges that the ninja faces. That previous generation, having survived a more hostile and outright white supremacy, if they held it down, they deserve credit for that. But those same people may be more content to live comfortably and return home at the ends of their lives. Verse 29. A clever general, therefore, avoids an army when its spirit is keen, but attacks when it is sluggish and inclined to return. This is the art of studying moods. You know, why white supremacy would rather attack straw men. The way they elevate rappers, comedians, and sellouts, they rather do that than to engage in actual intellectual debate with the strongest, with the keenest. You know, the enemy raises unqualified personalities as the gatekeepers of the Ninja America, avoiding facing the Dr. Claude Andersons or other true experts that will ask the hard questions or hold them to task. 33. It is a military axiom not to advance uphill against the enemy, nor to oppose him when he comes downhill. One thing I notice about ninjas in general is that they take pride in facing a problem head on, ideally, of facing down a situation bravely, openly, and honestly in public circles and spheres. But just know how the enemy thinks. According to this art of war, just know that facing one man to man, that's a virtue when you're dealing with family and friends, correcting someone in one circle, but it's not so advantageous when dealing with a true foreign enemy whose motive is death and debilitation. Chapter 8, Variation in Tactics. Verse 1. Sun Tzu said, "In war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign, collects his army, and concentrates his forces." We ninjas may think that changes in fashion and trends come from the streets and that they spread through the popular culture. In reality, much of what becomes trendy amongst us is promoted from the top down. The hostile think tanks and big money gets behind the poisonous and detrimental culture, infiltrating, influencing, while demonizing or ignoring what would be wholesome for us ninjas. Chapter 9, The Army on the March. Verse 5. If you are anxious to fight, you should not go to meet the invader near a river which he has to cross. You know, when there's a topic that's flowing in mainstream society, it's usually not the best time to argue or debate your point rationally, to engage in a conflict of debate thinking you're going to rationalize and use reason. Because the noise and the momentum that's flowing in the moment will drown the good sense of your cause. It's best to take note of who's crossing in mainstream and at what point. What is their direction and position? What is Stephen A. Smith saying? What is, Kevin Hart's position on something? Shout out to Kevin Hart. Take note of that person's position as they're crossing in the mainstream That way a ninja can revisit the consequences at a later time on that person, at a later time when you have higher grounds, when you're at higher grounds and the adversary does not have the advantage of the mainstream attention. Verse 11. All armies prefer high ground to low and sunny places to dark. High ground is like being in the right. And when you have the moral high ground where you can stand on principles and justice, this is a strength. This does a lot for the morale and the psyche, knowing that you're fighting for the right cause. The army that is in the wrong is fighting an uphill battle in this sense, constantly carrying the weight of bad consciousness and having to do mental gymnastics to convince himself of a noble cause. One example of this would be the cognitive dissonance that plagues white society and has real and imagined ramifications on the health of the body. Sunny places are like being enlightened, even in dark times, having the wisdom and foresight that will guide the reasonable man, even in the midst of a media confusion. Verse 24. Humble words and increased preparations are signs that the enemy is about to advance. Violent language and driving forward as if to the attack are signs that he will retreat. When the devil appears suddenly as Lucifer, speaking humbly to you, offering education and his olive branch in a smooth hand, you know that he's up to something. But when he is boisterous and threatening, shooting you down in the streets and telling you all that he will do to you, it is a sign not of confidence, but of fear in an imminent retreat. Verse 36. Too frequent rewards signify that the enemy is at the end of his resources. Too many punishments betray a condition of dire distress. You know, the United States gives billions upon billions to bail out and reward large corporations and to bribe people to go along with their programs. As with the falling economy, this is a sign of distress and desperation. The way the powers that be punishes severely those who dare speak out or go against the popular agenda is evident. And as Sun Tzu says, an act of dire distress. Verse 40. If our troops are no more in number than the enemy, that is amply sufficient. It only means that no direct attack can be made. What we can do is simply to concentrate all of our available strength, keep a close watch on the enemy, and obtain reinforcements. As white supremacy falters in physical numbers, we see the rise of a nuancing of what it means to be white and of racism, the widening acceptance of the definition of whiteness. There's an uptick in the racial aggression in mainstream, even if outright public lynching becomes not the order of the day as it once was when they had the strength of numbers. The attack becomes less direct, the language more coded so as to justify the attacks against the ninjas. As for reinforcements, the U.S. is particular as to the screening used to allow foreign numbers into the country. The gatekeepers run anti-ninja campaigns at home and abroad so that at the moment of crossing in, the foreigner need but be reminded and reinforced, frisked, as it were, as to his allegiance to the white supremacy against the ninjas. Verse 43. Therefore, soldiers must be treated in the first instance with humanity, but kept under control by means of iron discipline. This is a certain road to victory. There's got to be consequences for ninjas who betray the rest of the clan. Chapter 10, Terrain. Verse 2. Ground which can be freely traversed by both sides is called accessible. Verse 3. With regard to ground of this nature, be before the enemy in occupying the raised and sunny spots, and carefully guard your line of supplies. Then you will be able to fight with advantage. In open cultural pathways of society, such as movies and music, etc., the ninjas should keep their own brand and creation to themselves, not allowing others to freely take over and capitalize. Take over and capitalize off of the ninjas' cultural inventions, rap, hip-hop, dance, and speech, etc. So rap, hip-hop, dance, and speech, if it's put out there by the ninjas and left unguarded, it becomes provisions that the enemy quickly steals and forages, strengthening his own forces by eating off the ninjas' fruits of labor. Verse 31. Hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, your victory will not stand in doubt. If you know heaven and know earth, you may make your victory complete. Ninja should study history and his own story as well. This way a ninja can come to know himself and the enemy, knowing the Most High Yah and the moral code, while also considering the real life situation that a ninja faces in reality means knowing heaven and earth. As Sun Tzu says, you make your victory complete. I will add that you make your victory complete regardless. Chapter 11, the 9 situations. Verse 23. Throw your soldiers into positions whence there is no escape, and they will prefer death to flight. If they will face death, there is nothing they may not achieve. Officers and men alike will put forth their utmost strength. When a man does not strive to please himself in this life, but to please Yah, his people, or some higher calling, even death is not a deal breaker for him. He'll peacefully pay the price for legacy and a higher calling, especially when the reward is also worth it along the way. The honor, love, and respect of the people, I believe, is great enough to follow into the afterlife. This is how great it feels at times, that it crosses over between feeling and reason itself. The ninja must not strive in the individual state of mind. He must scale the walls of that prison with his grappling hook, pound through with a series of debilitating side kicks, or by any means trenched beneath, to reunite with the rest of his community. The ninja community is on desperate grounds on some level for the past 400 years, at least. Verse 26. Prohibit the taking of omens and do away with superstitious doubts. Then, until death itself comes, no calamity need be feared. Much of what the ninja has been convinced of in versions of dominant religion effectively amounts to omens and superstitions. The fanatic, while thinking himself fearful to God, is fearful to the God of this land. Dominant culture of capitalism and zero-sum relationships. It's not the same God of the ninja fathers. American dominant culture presides over all mainstream worldly society. The mainstream religious society is one of the most crucial realms of control. because this stream feeds into the mind, the heart, and highest levels of devotion of the ninja. There were those slaves who were fearful of opposing that institution of old in the privacy of his heart because he felt it contentious to God and select scriptures. Again, there are those who fear taking a stand on race matters for fear of being contentious to certain scripture and causing division in the feigned universal body of Christ. Yes, that body of Christ where the head lives in segregated upscale neighborhoods and socioeconomic brackets, and the tail is locked in prison houses and neighborhoods where the church is a stone's throw away from the liquor store. You see, beliefs and conjectures that have no basis in reality are mere omens and superstitions by definition. Verse 30. Asked if an army can be made to imitate the Shuai-Jin, I should answer, yes, for the men of Wu and the men of Yu are enemies. But if they are crossing a river in the same boat and are caught by a storm, they will come to each other's assistance, just as the left hand helps the right. Nature of the unity of white supremacist states is not a positive unity. It's not a commonality necessarily with good intentions. Rather, it's based on negative shared interests. Namely, that they all would oppress the preferred target, which is the ninja, thereby securing a relatively privileged position in the world. The German, the Swede, the wealthy uptownian, and the Appalachian trailer dweller often have nothing more in common than a melanin deficiency and a shared interest drawn about the oppression of the ninja dressed in black. In the scope of this racial ideology, they find themselves in the same boat of imagination, a boat of imagined whiteness. So it's helpful to combat white supremacy on an image level as well, reaching the imaginations, proving it unsustainable in the minds of the masses by means of controlling a ninja's media and self-imagery. This is a component of spiritual warfare. Verse 31. Hence it is not enough to put one's trust in a tethering of horses and the burying of chariot wheels in the ground. So the weapons of warfare are not ultimately carnal. The principles of strength and victory rest on strongholds of courage and morale. The attack by fire. Verse 1. Sun Tzu said, there are 5 ways of attacking with fire. The first is to burn soldiers in their camp. The second to burn stores. The third is to burn baggage trains. The fourth is to burn arsenals and magazines. The fifth is to hurl dropping fire amongst the enemy. There was a time when physical fire was a deathly serious threat to strongholds and provisions in war. Though fire by itself now is not the weapon of war that it once was, it still burns highly effective and brightly in symbology and metaphorical revelation, a smoldering psychological reminder of the threat of the times. There can be firestorms through media, public lynching where someone is burned alive, or even just the threat of that smoke and heat can be enough to back down the opposition. Chapter 13. The Use of Spies. Verse 2. Hostile armies may face each other for years, striving for the victory which is decided in a single day. This being so, To remain in ignorance of the enemy's condition simply because one grudges the outlay of 100 ounces of silver in honors and emoluments is the height of inhumanity. To stay ignorant of the conditions of the dominant society, ignoring consistently why the society uses mouthpieces as tools, uses mouthpieces to preach false prophecies to the masses, and false prophecies are not only preached to the church-going. But to stay willfully ignorant of this fact to simply get reward and money is the height of inhumanity, as Sun Tzu says. And I add, it is a way that even the darkest ninja can lose his color and humanity over time and effort. This danger does not apply only to those with large social platforms. It applies as badly to the common person, what he repeats going around in the streets like a smart zombie, regurgitating what the fox or the sea ignorant has fed him. Verse 14. Hence it is that which none in the whole army are more intimate relations to be maintained than with spies. None should be more liberally rewarded. In no other business should greater secrecy be preserved. The workings and identity of a spy intersect often with that of the sellout. There is much in common between them if they are not the same. They are those who attain or have a level of intimate knowledge or relationship with the target culture, only to sell away those secrets for some form of real or imagined reward from the enemy, the dominant society in this case. Shout out to the spook who sat by the door. The spook who sat by the door was an example of a noble spy rising through the ranks of the enemy as an alleged sellout to the ninja race, only to convert the tactics and intel acquired from the institutions of the enemy to benefit his fellow ninjas in black. I would call this sort of spy a spy with a good cause. I guess ultimately it comes down to the motives and the moral ground of the respective armies. If one army has an objective moral high ground, say justice and equality, while the other is seeking to dominate, well, the one, though it may be at a loss in tactical position at the time in the world, still holds superiority in the moral high ground. And the spy that works for the army of the moral high ground is not a sellout to his own ninja. In that case, he is a noble spy. He is a part of the army, an intel gathering. That should be highly rewarded as well. Verse 15. Spies cannot be usefully employed without a certain intuitive sagacity. Verse 16. They cannot be properly managed without benevolence and straightforwardness. Verse 17. Without subtle ingenuity of mind, one cannot make certain of the truth of their reports. The reason spies is difficult to trust them and they have to be constantly fact-checked is because spies and sellouts, they have an ingrained duality of nature if they're gonna really be good at it. Like an undercover cop who goes undercover for a prolonged period of time may begin to question the moral high ground of the police forces, for example, once he begins to form kinships and family with the people who he is investigating and will ultimately bring down. This is a problem because the spy must stay true to his initial cause and family, or the crossroads conflict will come when that person may discover that their initial cause does not actually hold the moral high ground. And so spies and sellouts, they have an ingrained duality of nature, a schism, a confused identity at some point. On one hand, they are close enough to the target group to share in the precious and intimate secrets. On the other, they must be detached enough from their own family and community in order to sell them out. They must ultimately become detached enough from whichever group they decide to sell them out, which will amount to the death of those people, whether slow or sudden. Sun Tzu says the spy is not to be wholly trusted. I add that when coming from the oppressed and noble army of ninjas, the spy must first hate himself to the necessary extent as he hates his own people. So he is first despised of himself, and once found out, he is hated and despised by both sides of the war. Thank you for listening to this. I invite you to like and subscribe. Again, this was a flyover of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Give your comment. Say what makes sense, say what doesn't make sense. And again, I encourage you to read and go over this book. Not just this one, but when you have more time, The Spook That Sat by the Door. It's posted here. This is not meant to be an exhaustive, thorough critique of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, or even to say that these methods and ideologies and tactics actually fit the ninja community. It may be contrary to the moral code of certain people to employ certain tactics, but they're looked at as to their practicality and effectiveness in reality, so that even if a ninja doesn't want to employ these sorts of these tactics, must at least understand them so as to defend himself better. That being said, I'll look for your replies and your comments. I'll call you out, shout you out, subsequent videos. Be blessed. Fortify. Peace.